dry-bone town of Bitter Creek, where the church steeple leaned like it too, had grown weary of the sun and the dust. Mary Ellen Parker lived under the shadow of whispers, a woman who, despite her beauty and the gentle kindness she poured into every stitch of her sewing and every prayer she whispered at dusk, found herself cast aside time and again by men who courted only long enough to hear her name before remembering her father's debts, her mother's absence, and the cruel gossip that painted her as barren soil no seed could grow in. Though she was only 23 and carried a heart fuller than most could dream, suitors came with hats in hand, left with cold excuses, and each rejection carved deeper into her soul, until the townsfolk began to joke that she was destined for spinsterhood, a permanent figure by the church door with downcast eyes and no hand to hold. But on one windswept evening, when the saloon lights flickered and the horizon burned with crimson sunset, a cowboy rode in, tall in the saddle, dust on his boots, and a look in his eyes that spoke of miles traveled and storms endured. His name was James Holloway, a drifter with land he'd just claimed beyond the river bend. A man too used to silence to waste words. Yet when he saw Mary Ellen carrying water from the well, straining under the bucket's weight as the local boys snickered, he tipped his hat and said, "Need a hand, ma'am?" And something in his tone, steady, respectful, uncolored by mockery, struck her like a blessing. For here was a man who didn't look at her like a joke or a burden, but as a woman standing in the evening light. And though she stammered, cheeks burning, he smiled with a softness that set the town whispering again, because no one expected a man like him to notice a woman like her. And in that single moment, Mary Ellen's fate began to turn. In the weeks that followed, Bitter Creek watched with suspicion as James Holloway returned again and again, his visits never dressed in the frills of flowers or sweet words, but in quiet companionship, helping Mary Ellen chop wood when her arms ached, walking her home from church without asking permission, listening to her speak of the dreams she'd buried under rejection. A home with laughter, a child's footsteps, a life where she wasn't a cast-off but a cornerstone. And though she often caught herself muttering, "I'm not wanted, not by anyone worth the keeping," James would simply look at her with those steady eyes and answer, "Then every man before me was a fool," words that melted the years of scorn into something fragile but alive. Yet the town didn't take kindly to the sight of a cowboy choosing a woman they'd branded unwanted, and old men muttered at the saloon that James must be desperate, while the women in church whispered that Mary Ellen had tricked him with a pity face. But James, unbending, walked taller with her on his arm, and when one bold suitor who had once scorned her sneered at him in the street, saying, "You'll regret hitching yourself to damaged goods," James's fist struck so fast the man fell into the dust, and James, towering over him, declared for all to hear, "This woman is mine, and if you can't respect her, you'll respect my hands," leaving silence thick in the air. And though Mary Ellen trembled at the violence, her heart swelled at the certainty in his voice, for never before had a man not only accepted her but defended her as if she were treasure. And under the wide prairie sky that night, when James asked in his simple way, "Mary Ellen, will you be my wife?" she could barely breathe through the tears, because for the first time someone said yes, not with hesitation, not with pity, but with conviction, and her whispered yes back to him was not just an answer. It was a release from years of shame. The wedding was not grand, only a preacher, 2 witnesses, and the endless horizon stretching gold as the sun set behind the hills. But to Mary Ellen it felt like heaven's gates had opened, because for once the bells that rang were not mocking her loneliness, but blessing her union. And though the town still whispered, James built her a home on his ranch with his own calloused hands, every beam hammered with purpose, every nail driven as if sealing a promise. And in that home Mary Ellen found what she had long feared was denied to her: warmth, laughter, and soon after, the swelling of her belly that silenced even the cruelest tongues. For the woman they thought barren carried life, a daughter who would be born into love, fierce, enough to shield her from the world's scorn. And during those months, Mary Ellen often sat on the porch, hand resting on her womb, whispering, "Little one, you are wanted, and through you I am made whole." And James would sit beside her, arm around her shoulders, promising, "She'll never know the loneliness you did, not while I draw breath." And when the baby came, small and fierce with a cry that filled their cabin, Mary Ellen wept as she held her daughter, naming her Grace, because that's what she was, a grace that healed wounds, that proved every suitor wrong, that made every rejection fade into nothing. And though the town looked on with grudging respect, some even lowering their eyes in shame, Mary Ellen no longer cared for their judgment. For she had James, she had grace, and she had a life built not on acceptance from others, but on the love of one man, brave enough to say yes when everyone else had turned away. Years rolled like dust on the wind, and Bitter Creek changed in small ways, but never forgot how James Holloway had chosen the woman they mocked, only to watch her blossom into the heart of a family that thrived. And though some still clung to bitterness, many came to admire the strength Mary Ellen showed, raising Grace with gentleness and steel, standing proudly at James's side at every town gathering, no longer shrinking under stares, for rejection had lost its sting, replaced by the knowledge that she was not only wife and mother, but proof that worth is never measured by the voices of the crowd, but by the courage to keep believing when the world says you're nothing. And as Grace grew, wild curls and bright eyes, the townsfolk often marveled at the way James carried her on his shoulders, laughing with pride, while Mary Ellen watched with a heart so full she often whispered, "I was once unwanted, and now I am everything to them." And though life brought storms, droughts, sickness, lean years, the bond between them only grew stronger, a fortress of love against the winds of cruelty, until one evening as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in firelight, Mary Ellen stood on that same porch where she had once whispered her loneliness, now holding Grace against her hip as James wrapped his arms around them both. And she thought of every suitor who had turned her away, every cruel whisper, every mocking glance, and she smiled, for they had been wrong, all of them. And in their place stood a cowboy's yes, a daughter's laugh, and a life carved from dust into gold. And if the town still remembered her as the girl no one wanted, let them, because she knew the truth, that she had been chosen, loved and made whole, and no rejection could ever steal that away. Friends, if Mary Ellen's journey touched your heart, if you felt her pain, her triumph, and the power of a single yes that changed everything, then don't just let this story fade into the dust. Hit that subscribe button now. Ride with us through more Wild West tales of love, courage, and redemption, and help us keep these fires of storytelling alive. Your support makes every story stronger.